Oh, we are live. Holy cow. I was just saying to Josh that, man, my chair is squeaky tonight, but I don't know what's going on. But hey, welcome back to Fight on Montana. We've got another episode, guys. It is tournament time. So we're going to talk some basketball. But first, we got to give a Griz update because there's some huge things happening around Griz sports. So first of all, men's tennis. They are having a pretty good year. You know, they're just starting their season, guys. They're 4-5 overall, which is kind of a weird because they start back in September, and then they then go towards November, take a break, start back up in January, just to kind of go back down since January. They played North Dakota. They lost 3-4. Played Whitworth a couple times, beat them 7-0. Beat Eastern Washington 7-0. Lost 3-4 to Air Force and 2-5 to Abilene Christian. They postponed UNLV and San Diego. They were canceled. They played Whitman 7-0. They lost to Gonzaga 0-7. UC Davis got canceled. And then this last week, they were 2-5 loss against Sacramento State. So definitely, if you have the chance, go support the men's tennis program. But yeah, it's that time of year where there's a lot of sports going on, and pretty crazy time of the year.
Yeah, there's literally, I think right now, indoor track just got done.
Yep.
Spring track starts. Softball's been going now for about 4 weeks. You got lacrosse, and just about everything else that I think that you could possibly imagine going on right now.
Oh man!
The only thing, football's going on right now too. Is spring,
football is too. It's spring practice. Just
literally everybody's going
yesterday. So women's tennis, they're 3-6. Just to give you a down low on what they are doing. Pulling up their schedule here. 3-6. So if you go down here, sorry, I'm gonna. They played Cincinnati, that's Cincinnati and Utah. Holy cow, they went 0-4 against Utah, 1-4 against Cincinnati. Played Lewis and Clark State, which I think that's a Division II team. 5-2 and 7-0. Played Whitman, like the men did, 6-1. Played Idaho State. They were 2-5 with a loss there, and then UC Davis, they were 1-6. They do play this Friday at Sacramento State. So definitely that next weekend they play versus Montana State here in Missoula. So go support them at the Peak Racket Club. See if you can. I don't even know if you can go there. Do you know if you can go there and like support?
It used to be that you could.
That'd be interesting.
When they used to play in the bubble.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
When they used to play in the bubble, you could. And it's been years, but since they've been at Peak, I think there's got to be a little bit of availability to watch, but it's not going to probably be the best
very big
spectator assignment. It's much better when things unthaw and they can actually play at the U of M on the open courts. But it's I think we're a little ways away from that at this point.
Oh man, we still have lots and lots of snow here in Wyoming. Right. So, softball, they have had a hard year there. This is so like they've played some tough competition. So like that 0-15 record that you guys are seeing on YouTube, if you are seeing us on YouTube, they've played some extreme, some extreme teams. So. Just going down, Middle Tennessee, they lost by 1. And which is cool is they have a lot of these like tournament games, like the classics where they're playing all these teams. So they played Fresno State, lost 4-9. They played Fresno State again. They lost 4-8. They lost to UC Riverside 0-8. Played Middle Tennessee again 3-9. They played Cal State Bakersfield and they lost in 9 innings by 1 run. Played Hawaii. They lost 1-10. They played CSU Bakersfield again. They lost 3-7. Played UNLV. They lost 6-14. Played Hawaii 0-7. South Dakota, they were 1-2. Grand Canyon, they lost 0-8. Played Grand Canyon again, lost 3-7. Played Utah State 2 games. They lost 3-9 and 9-12. And so they will be going to the San Diego Classic. That's where, Josh, you could go see some softball.
Yeah, I may. Well, it really depends. I may be trying to get to that since it's just right down the road from where I'm at. No, they're struggling in part because they're one of their 2 starting pitchers ended up with a rather freak injury right before the season started, and so she's going to be out. Dana Butterfield's going to be out. I honestly don't know, but the sort of rumor or the word on the street is that she's going to be out until at least April.
Oh,
and
wow.
then they're missing their number 2 right now, who's missed most of the last 2 tournaments because of an arm injury she picked up when she was pitching against UNLV about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a bit of hard run. It's one of those sports where if you don't have good starting pitching, and so they've had to lean on 2 freshman girls to pitch, and there's a huge transition between going from high school where you're really super duper successful, where the girls you can get girls to offer at pitches outside of the zone, to the college game where their strike zone awareness gets a lot better, and they've just struggled, putting girls away, and it's just, and they've walked probably more than you would ever care to admit. I did a deep dive on this the other day. They're basically, averaging a free pass an inning, which is probably not a good way to win games. So, their offense has struggled a little bit, but most of it just come down to the fact that they haven't been competitive because they just don't right now. And if they get healthy again, they've got enough talent defensively. They're super athletic. But they're just not. It's hard to be in games when you're giving up, 7, 8 runs a shot, and probably half of them come from runners who get on because they're walked or hit by pitched.
Yeah.
I think it was some weird number, but I think it was like something like 35 girls they've hit in 15 games. It's just some really large number. It's part of it's
they get healthy. So
I hope they do too. And if they do, they were supposed to be picked 3rd in the conference, and I think honestly, if they got both of them back, I think they could fit, because this conference isn't as good as it was last year, because Weber was really good last year.
Yeah. Yep.
And this year, I think if things aligned, they'll be okay enough offensively, but if they can get their pitching in order, they'll be competitive with, because no team in the conference right now has a winning record.
No.
I think Portland State's it. I think they might be 7-7 or it might be Sac State, but there's not a lot of difference. I mean, there's, that's most of them have, because they all have the same problem. They are all cold weather teams except for Sac, and they go play in these tournaments against, upper or mid-level tier conference teams.
Yeah.
From, whether like this week or in Mountain West, and it's a little bit of a uphill slog.
Yeah.
So our conference gets bodied a little bit during the preseason tournaments because they're playing, Pac-12 and Mountain West or even SEC schools. So,
well, and this is kind of it's weird, but it's kind of cool too, because going towards San Diego, their classic that they're going to play in this week, their first game's against Boston University.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, that's weird, because it's all the rest of them are California teams, San Diego, Long Beach State, San Diego State. And I'm like, how'd Boston, go from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast? That's a weird team to have.
And a few years ago, this has become more of a pattern for college softball, because it used to be that teams would play in 3 or 4 really super large tournaments a year.
Yeah.
And the one that was really super popular here was actually a 2-weekend tournament that they would split, the the number of teams in half. So you'd have like 54 teams, and they'd be in Palm Springs for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And so it would have almost all of the Pac-12 schools, most of the SEC schools all would play in it. But things have changed now quite a bit in the last 4 or 5 years. And I think COVID had played a little bit of a role in that, that everybody started to regionalize their schedule more. But anybody north of basically mid-Nebraska spends pretty much the first probably 2 months solid on the road. I mean, it people don't really sort of get it. Same thing with baseball, but it's the biggest reason why baseball and softball are so expensive is that they have to fork out, buco bucks on travel expenses.
Yeah.
And so that's why they do the tournaments now, because they get bigger bang for their buck. They can play 5 games in 3 days. And so they don't have to constantly be on a bus and traveling. They just go to one place. And I think we were in Montana last year. I think we did 3 tournaments in California. This year, they won in Arizona, one in Vegas, and then San Diego State this week.
Yeah, Phoenix last week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, it's like anything else, is I think you just have to look at what you're meant to get out of these tournaments, especially for your, because almost all of the Big Sky Conference teams are middle or low tier. If you're just looking at it, analytically, they're all in the same boat. And so most of them are not going to come into conference season with, entirely, attractive records. I mean,
yeah. Well, and it's really weird because you look at their schedule, Josh, like you don't see all the Big Sky teams, which is you see Portland State, Sac State, Northern Colorado, Idaho State, and Weber State.
Yeah, that's it for the conference that has softball.
That's crazy.
And
you would think that the Bobcats or the Cats would at least have a team.
I think it's in the offing.
Okay.
I don't know when it's going to happen. The rumor had been that they were going to do it a handful of years after, but I don't know precisely what but so the problem really is that our conference schedule is really unbalanced this year. So we literally only have 2 non-conference games at home, and they're against NAIA schools, Providence and Carroll.
Yeah.
And then they go back out on the road, and then they go to Portland State and Oregon, and then I think they come home for one of their 2 3-game sets for conference.
They go,
and then they go back out on the road again. And so it's
Sacramento State, they're here.
Yeah, they play 8 home games this year.
Yeah.
And it's not a very good recipe if there's no home field advantage. I mean, it's great to play in Missoula, but you're never there.
Well, and they have a great facility,
it's great.
It's too.
Yeah. I think Weber is probably about the only one that would probably be close to it in terms of, and with I think what'll help coming down the road a little bit, whether it's this staff or the next staff or whatever happens down the road, is that I think having that indoor,
oh yeah, definitely,
is going to help softball probably more than any other sport, because they'll be able to use it solidly to get them up to speed quicker. Because right now they don't see really truly softball live pitching until they go play those tournaments.
Yeah.
And so you have just no real sort of barometer, as to where you're at until you actually go play those games. And so you can look really good in practice, but until you start playing anybody. And they've been, aside from the pitching, they've lost some games where if they could have just, because again, it's a hitting issue, and if you don't see live pitching a lot, it's a whole different animal.
Yeah.
And so they struggled early just because they couldn't. I mean, they had I think 4 consecutive games where they had 3 hits or less, and you're not going to win a lot of games that way. But they're relatively young, even throughout the course of their program. They only have 4 seniors, so and one of them's a pitcher, and so it's like. They knew they were going to have a few hiccups this year, but it's just been a little bit of growing pains with most of their contributing elements have been a little bit slow. Ontiveros has started slowly. Klusewicz has started slowly. And so they've had to lean on, a couple of those younger girls. Jancy's been okay. So they're just, like I said, I think if they get into conference season, the record may look terrible at the end of the year. But at the same point,
you really don't care until the tournament.
No, and I think people are getting a little bit antsy because they had it really good when Pinkerton was here, but he brought a lot of people in. He had some really good connections, and then it's not that Mel isn't doing the job. It's I just think that really what it comes down to is that there was that a little bit of a bubble there, and then COVID killed it. They haven't been able to recruit the same way. They were, restrictions in recruiting. They've gone to almost a more regional recruiting format the last few years, maybe out of necessity or out of philosophy. I don't know, but they don't have very many. I think probably half of the squad was from California 5 years ago. And now I think they have just the one or maybe two girls from California, which is if you're going to recruit for softball, got to spend some time there.
Oh yeah, definitely. They can play all year round. So
yeah.
All right, man. Well, that's all I got for Griz update, guys. We'll do more. Actually, what I did want to do, which I totally forgot. I don't want to forget, if you guys have not gone and checked out Griz Lacrosse, definitely do. They have won. They're 5-0 right now. They are number 1 in the country in Division II, MCLA Division II coaches poll this week. So showing this graphic, it was handed out on Twitter with the Griz Lacrosse team. Definitely, they had an amazing week where they played St. Thomas, the number 1 school, beat them by like 10-8 at St. Thomas. They have a game, I believe, tomorrow night in Missoula against the Cats. So if you can go, definitely go support them. It's at 7:30 at Griz. So definitely go support them if you can't make it. I believe they stream it as well. I've seen one game where they've streamed it, but amazing Griz Lacrosse. That is the hopping sport right now, where it's taken the whole country.
Yeah. It's growing everywhere.
Yeah.
It's become, you think soccer is, huge here in San Diego. It's, everybody plays lacrosse now. It's incredible. It's, cause it's a blend of a lot of things. It's got, it plays with the speed of basketball. It's got some physicality and so, kids love it. And it's a good sport to watch, actually.
It is. When back, 15 years ago, probably, it was probably more of a East Coast based sport where you would see, I would love watching it. That's one of my favorite sports that I love just to watch, because the movement and just if you've never tried lacrosse, go try it out, because it's actually really hard.
Yeah.
It's not as easy as it looks. And so these guys make it look easy. But go support them. That's an amazing, I think it's that first ever number 1 seed. And so it's tough to do even in Division II. And I think the Cats are ranked, I believe, if I'm not forgetting, they're like ranked in the top 10 as well. So it should be a good game if you guys can go support Griz Lacrosse and, watch it if you can't be there. So let's get some basketball. Let's go to tournament time, guys. We have some tournament basketball happening here Saturday. But before we get into the tournament stuff, let's just talk about, the last game of what it was. Griz, let's talk about the men's game at Idaho. They win 68-53. And, it wasn't a close one, but they didn't drop the ball and start, making it close. But it wasn't that great to watch in the first half.
I had joked about it. I have a good friend of mine, actually a former student of mine, who's U of I grad, and they do the Tubs of the Club podcast. And so I've had a pretty long, both of those guys have a long-standing frustration of where the men's basketball program for U of I has gone since Verlin left, was it 4 or 5 years ago, and Claus just hasn't got it done. But what I was joking about was that what is more likely to happen second half was, neither team make it out of the 40s. But the other part of it was, and I felt really bad by saying this, but that Idaho would fire Claus mid-quarter or mid-half, and turns out that's exactly what they did. But they just waited until the end of the game to do it. And, they Idaho's got a couple players, guys who can play.
Oh yeah,
they just they've never been able to play defense, and when and again, I'm not trying to pick on Brandon Whitney at all. But when that what Brandon Whitney does, and you can't defend Brandon Whitney, you got a problem, because he made a couple of huge plays in the second half, right at the beginning, and late in the first, where he just got free access to the rim.
Yeah,
and so I saw something in the game that I never thought I would see with Brandon Whitney. He had an and one, and he had a mid-range jump shot, and
a 3-pointer.
Yeah. So it's like if you had your odds on a parlay through your favorite betting entity, you might have made some serious money off of that one. I don't think that ever had happened with Brandon before.
No,
but it was good to actually see him just stop and pop on that mid-range one, because that's what everybody had been giving him, and he just doesn't want to take it. But if he would just stop and occasionally do that, things would loosen up for him a little bit.
Well, and he didn't even hesitate. He just took that shot, so it was nice. Usually he hesitates a little bit and then takes it. So
normally most of the time he sits around there, tests the wind, waits for everybody else, does about 3 pivots, and then shoots.
Yep.
What the funny thing is though, I think we were talking about this a few weeks ago, but if he would just shoot it, and he shoots it in rhythm, he's fine.
Yep.
It's like anybody else, I think, and I shouldn't talk because I'm got the shot of a bricklayer. But the fact of the matter is that, it's just one of those things in your head.
Yeah.
That's why I like watching Anna Moody play, because the guy has no conscience and he just shoots.
Yeah.
And it's smooth. There's not ever a hitch in it.
No.
And he just lets it go. And I wish Brandon would do it, because if Brandon would learn that, I could care less of whether he ever shoots another 3-pointer and makes it in my life.
Yeah.
It's that mid-range thing where if he would learn just to stop and come off of that into that open space where everybody's giving it, it would just open things up for him. And I think subconsciously, because he does have a funky shot. It's not the prettiest thing we've ever seen. No. And I think he does get it in his head a little bit that he gets a little bit mechanical. Yeah. And if he just lets it go, he's fine.
Yeah.
And he's a college basketball player. So you'd think that, he's more than not capable, better than you and I, obviously, at making it. I think it's just more of a confidence thing.
Yeah. Well, and you said something like, they Idaho has some good players, and they do. Devontae Moffitt is a really good player. He doesn't play too much defense, which I think he's a bigger guy, a bigger guard, where I think he could play some defense. And then Isaac Jones is just a beast, where in that game, I thought for me, it looked like they had two styles that they were trying to run, and they really are like competing styles, where they like to go through Isaac and then they like to go through Devontae too. And it's like, if they could just merge those and kind of have something where they're working together, it would be, they'd be a whole lot better.
Yeah. And I feel like two things. And if you follow those guys, I think that had been one of their complaints all year.
Yeah.
It's like at times it was like 10 straight possessions of Moffitt, and then 5 possessions of Jones, and then they would forget about Moffitt again. And then you would both of those guys have to have touches.
Yeah.
And that was the same thing that happened early in the second half. I mean, it was astounding how little Jones touched the ball in the second half.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, I think that we started doing what we've been doing lately, and I like it because we're doing it. Is that I feel bad for Deshaun Thomas because that guy is literally right now a magnet for
fouls,
cheap and absurd fouls, and they're all off ball things.
Oh, yeah.
It's really weird. And
Yep.
he's just had a hard run of about the last 3 or 4 weeks where he hasn't been able to get in any fluidity offense. I think he took one shot, maybe two against Idaho. And I think the week before, I think he had a game where he didn't have any.
Yeah.
And so you're just looking at it and go,
he shot three field goals, 2 threes.
And what I think the problem is that he's been legitimately essentially a reserve.
Mm-hmm.
And Oki's getting all the playing time, which, from what he's providing right now, it's
good.
I mean, he's not going to give you points unless you're Idaho and are like, you know what, we'll give you a layup or a dunk or something. But but the fact of the matter is that he has become, especially defensively, that guy that we haven't had for a couple of years.
Yeah,
and he helps out Bannon a ton.
Yeah,
because now they can cycle Bannon off of the big post dude.
Yeah,
and it actually puts Bannon in a better position offensively, because I really feel like, and again, Idaho doesn't play defense, but are not very well anyway. But Bannon did, even in the CAC game, he looks so much more fluid offensively and athletic. And I think a little bit of that has to do with the fact that they've been allowing somebody else to carry the weight down low defensively. And that's what Oki does, is for his lack of size, because he's not a big dude.
No, he's probably 6'8", 6'9".
Yeah, 6'8", 6'9". And I think, Bannon's got at least 40 pounds on him. And I think at least that with Deshaun Thomas, but he's athletic.
Yeah.
He gets up off the floor, so he plays a little bit taller and he rebounds well. But he's super mobile, and against a lot of those teams that we've been playing, that Sac State does it, where they can flex those guys out. Weber State does it. He's an incredible tool to have, because he can defend those stretch 4 and 5 guys, all the way out to the 3-point line, and he's a pretty athletic guy. But I feel bad for Thomas, though.
6'8", 218 is Lalu. But yeah, and I think that the Deshaun Thomas factor, I think teams are trying to get him in foul trouble, just because it takes another cog out of the Montana scheme of, hey, if we get him out, get him, off the floor, we only have to worry about 2 of the 3, and also, I love Lonell Martin, but he's had a couple rough games as well where he hasn't been shooting the ball very good. And so, with that, you kind of just rely on Moody and Bannon, and good thing that, Brandon Whitney has kind of showed up in some of these games where they can kind of get some scoring, and, ultra consistent Josh Vasquez, with just what he brings to the table. He really, like, my thought process is, in that game, he really saved our butt in that first half, because he hit some of those shots and just played really good aggressive defense, and kind of was that consistent cog where that the first 10, 12 minutes, it was kind of dicey there. And he hit that, I don't know what shot it was, but it was a shot where the shot clock was coming down, and he got it right off before the shot clock went. That was
it reminded me.
Beautiful shot.
Yeah. Well, what it reminded me of is, 2 or 3 years ago, that was our offense.
Mm-hmm.
It was, let's grind it all the way down. So if you again follow, if you want to find somebody who really loves to watch Travis DeCure offenses, follow Brian Marceau on Twitter. But he's right, though, is that he goes, we got into that habit in the first half of all of this pointless motion, where guys would just be spinning around each other on the perimeter, and nobody was cutting to the basket, especially when Moody's off the floor. And so you end up in all these positions where late in the shot clock, you're never in a position to actually make a good basketball move to get a shot off. And that was our problem the last 2 years. And that's why we'd go through those 10, 12-minute stretches of not scoring.
Yep.
And so, but the advantage with Vasquez is that, and Travis had said it relatively consistently over the years is that it wasn't his ability to shoot that wasn't keeping him off, that was keeping him off the floor.
Yeah.
And I honestly at times sort of wonder what it was, because I just honestly don't know. But he's a classic glue guy.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And what he's done this year, because he had a relatively decent freshman year.
Yeah.
And then he was basically not heard from for 2 years.
No.
Got very little minutes last year. And now, depending upon the matchup, he's probably a better guy to have out there than Brandon Whitney.
Yeah.
Because again, he provides that shooting ability, and his shot is pretty.
It is.
And it's just as consistent, at least most of the time, as Moody's is.
Yeah.
And so you have that feeling that right now, if those guys are on the floor together, teams can't shade their defense to Moody like they want to.
Yeah.
And because that's what Montana State tried to do. That's sort of the problem sometimes, where you can see that, like, that rough stretch in first half of the conference season where Travis kept running out Brandon Whitney all the time. And it was really, teams were over rotating to the point that it was clogged. They knew that they didn't have to defend Brandon beyond 15 feet.
Yep.
And they were just funneling him in like they had done last year. And there was just no real adjustment. And then, so now having the ability to run out Vasquez, it widens the floor.
It does.
And, and especially on nights where, Moody was a little bit absent in the first half.
Yeah.
But you don't have to give Moody a lot of window.
No, and what's awesome about him is that he can have a rough day, and he just sees one go in, and then you just hold on tight because you're going to probably see another 2 or 3 go in, which is amazing. But we get that win, we move on. They, like Coach DeCure says on the after the game, is they wanted to kind of work on some of the flow things, kind of the defense. I think they did. They closed the game out, even though it wasn't pretty. We kind of closed one out where I thought, even though Idaho's not a great team, they play better at home. And I thought, if anything, going a game right before the Big Sky tournament, this is the one that we lose, right?
Yeah.
That screws us over or something like that. So I'm glad we got the win. We can focus on the Big Sky tournament. And, just so if you guys have not seen, I'll put the graphic up here of the men's basketball tournament. We get the 4-5 game, which this is a different kind of bracket style than the last couple of years, where I thought the last couple of years, the 1, 2, 3, and 4 were all on one kind of line. And so they've kind of moved those around where the top 2 seeds play on a Sunday. They get a day off on that Saturday. They get a day off, and then they play Monday. They don't play Monday. They get a day off Monday, and then they play Tuesday.
Yeah.
And so, Josh, I've got some thoughts here. I want to know your thoughts too, but right off the top, I think we kind of lucked out with who we got. Beating a team 3 times in a row is always hard, but knowing with who we're going up against and our style of how we're playing, I would rather see Idaho State than Sac State or Weber State, and or NAU for that fact, because I think that's just a mismatch as well. And so, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with the same thing, which is when I first saw this, of the teams who could have finished 5th, the team that I didn't want to finish 5th was Sac State.
Yeah.
Because I knew we weren't going to catch Weber. And so at this point, that by finishing where we at, stylistically, Idaho State will be a little bit of a slugfest because they've got that behemoth down low. But the advantage is when you look at that whole side of the bracket that we're on, stylistically, I'm just pretty happy that all of the teams who play knockdown, drag out, fist fight defense are all on the other side of the bracket.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, because it's, I mean, that Portland State Northern Colorado game might get out of the 70s, but there's not a single other one of those games that's going to get that. I think they'd be really lucky in that Weber State Sac State game.
Yeah,
that game gets to
out of the 60s,
55.
Yeah.
With the way that both of them prefer to play. I mean, that might be about as excruciating game on the planet to watch, just pace wise. So,
well, and Dylan Jones will probably have half the points as well, too,
right?
so.
You know, he'll probably go for 25 and 20.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, just looking at it, man, like there's gonna be some good games, like the NAU game, and just to go back, like I know, sorry, we're kind of going back, you know, Idaho not having their coach. I think they NAU kind of got lucky in the fact that they're going to have a team that's coming off of a loss, that they just lost their coach, which I have no clue. Like, I know you want to fire him, but just wait, what, a week? Like,
yeah,
it doesn't mean like 10 minutes after the game. Did you let him use the bathroom before you fired him? Like, holy cow.
Yeah, so I have an assumption, but I think he knew this was going to happen.
Okay.
But I don't know for sure, but I think that this was fairly well communicated, that he wasn't likely. But I think the other part of it was, as you know, those Tubs at the Clubs guys, I don't think they wanted any chance that Idaho would catch fire in the tournament and then somehow they feel obligated to bring Claus back. I mean, I think he's an all-around nice guy, but I think that where Idaho would expect to be basketball-wise in this conference, they're not, and he just didn't get it done. So,
but just seeing where they came in, like the beginning of it when they came back to where they are now, oh my gosh! And they have that arena is a beautiful arena.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
You know, Weber State and Idaho have the two best probably arenas for basketball that I've seen. That are amazing.
Yeah.
The architecture on the Idaho one is just amazing too. So yeah.
Well, and that's what I think, you know, when you look at that game, you know, if we just start at that side of the bracket.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want anything to do with NAU.
No.
Because I think they have probably maybe outside of maybe Montana State, the best inside-outside combo in the conference.
Yep.
And Cone can score
whenever he wants,
anywhere. And Tout is proven to be, I mean, I would have made an argument probably 3 weeks ago that he probably would have been, you know, first team all conference, but I'm not sure that that'll happen. But
yeah,
because he was a double machine.
Oh yeah.
And so if I were to take a guess, I think that that's a game that NAU should win. But you know what? I feel like, you know, Idaho might just say, you know, we might play up to our level, because they're a little bit better than what they've shown all year.
Yeah.
And then NAU has had that penchant to make games a lot closer than they really should have for most of the season. So that's a game
that's the team where it's so crazy. If you look at their record and then you go you dive deep, that team, if they would have won half of the close games, like a lot of their losses, I wouldn't say all their losses, but a lot of their losses are like 1 point or 1 possession games. They have 2 losses to Portland State that were game winners.
Yeah.
That if you win those games, you know, they're probably the number is that 9 seed, as I can't see. They'd probably go from number 9 to probably 5.
I would
think.
Because they were in the inverse of what we were.
Yeah.
Where we had sort of split all of those tight games for about 4 weeks, that we had either early on we lost all of them, and then we went on a run where we won almost all of them.
Yeah.
But that's the difference, is that up until recently, NAU didn't win any of them.
Yeah.
And so they are a team that's probably, by talent wise and what they have, vastly better record. And they're actually very well suited. If they were to win that game, they probably match up with Eastern pretty dang
Oh
well.
yeah. Well, and if you go into their schedule, I think they played Eastern a couple weeks ago, and didn't they like almost beat them? Like,
Yeah, it was
I'm trying to
close for
look.
a while.
Yeah, I'm trying to look
And
at their schedule real quick to. But yeah, definitely that's probably, I totally have that down as well, and we'll give your guys, or like as we go through this, give you guys what we think. But I totally have NAU down, and I think Josh, you probably have NAU down as well.
yeah.
So that they lost to Eastern Washington at Flagstaff 76-79. That was back in January. And then they got pretty beat down in Cheney 55-72.
Yeah.
But
I hate that gym is where shooters go to die unless you're Eastern. It's a weird gym to be in. It's got some weird depth, like, that knowing a handful of people who have played in there over the years. It's just a little bit of a different vibe for a gym. I mean, it's in halfway decent college campus stadium or gym, but it's not.
yeah,
But it's got weird ends, and so you just feel like you're sometimes shooting in a tunnel. But yeah, it's not. It's never been a place where U of M's ever gone in and played particularly well.
yeah,
Save for the, occasional performance where they played, a little bit, but it's been pretty much an awful place to play
yeah.
for
But
most teams.
that next game, you got Portland State, Northern Colorado. Portland State, they're kind of that chaotic press team. Northern Colorado just kind of really, really confuses me. They're picked, I believe, like number 2 or 3 in the conference preseason rankings. They have probably 3 of the best probably players in the conference, and they are not good. They are not good.
Well, if Connect and company get to go,
Yeah,
and they can get their game where if they get to 80, they'll win.
yeah.
It's just their problem is that there are nights where they can't throw it in the ocean, and they're not nearly as good
Inside
as they were the last 2 years, and so they can't win those. They're not as big. They lost one guy to a transfer, a couple more to graduation. They're just not as deep, and so they just don't have that inside presence, and they're not as good defensively as they were, but they are and can score probably as easily as any team in the conference when they're on.
Yeah,
it's just that that's just been a little bit of a hit and miss proposition.
definitely. I have Portland State winning that one. What do you have?
I mean, on my vibe, that's where I sort of initially was leaning, but I feel like I think stylistically, Northern Colorado probably matches up a little bit better.
Yeah,
with what they do, with what Portland State does. I just think that, when Northern Colorado's going, they score easier than what I think Portland State does. So, my sense is that if this game is played in the 70s, it's a game that Northern Colorado wins.
Okay.
But like I said, I'm sort of a flip of a coin on this one. Sort of but I feel like that, my gut is I just like a little bit more offensively what Northern Colorado can do. So
yeah,
I'll take
it definitely
there.
So we'll go back up to the top. That those are the 2 Saturday games, guys, and then the Sunday games. If we're looking at it, you've got Eastern Washington probably playing NAU, and then you've got the Cats probably playing Portland State or Northern Colorado. I don't see any of those teams losing those. I don't think, especially Montana State, where they've got those other teams that they're not going to probably match up very well with the Cats. I see them pretty easily, handedly moving on to the semifinals. But that NAU playing Eastern Washington, if you've got some time at 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time on ESPN Plus, I'd definitely watch that game. That could be an interesting game.
Yeah, like I feel like this is one of those games because Eastern limped in,
Oh yeah,
losing their last
2
two games.
losses. Yep.
I feel like this is one of those games where it's tied early.
Yeah.
This is one of those ones that NAU can hang around for quite a bit longer than maybe they should.
Yeah.
But you look at the totality of what Eastern has and how well they score. If they get off to a reasonably good start, I think that they win that game probably going away. But
yeah.
But you almost think that if NAU can make that a game early,
yep.
That especially after the way that the game that they lost on Saturday night and then just getting pummeled by Montana State on Monday, that may not be one of those things where they've had a great year, but they just think a little bit too much, might get in their head a little bit. But on paper, Eastern should win that.
Yeah, and I figured, I told this to one of my buddies. I'm like, yeah, I think Eastern Washington will probably go 18-0 and probably then lose in the conference tournament. Just because it's so hard to go undefeated in a conference, and 16-2 is an amazing record. But to just be on no matter what all the time is really hard. I don't see I think NAU is going to keep it close. I think Eastern will probably take it. And then, going to the Griz and Idaho State, I think we both are on kind of a consistent basis of the Griz should win that one. Hopefully they do. I'm one of those pessimistic fans that I'm not really comfortable unless we're 20 points ahead.
Well, and I think, and I think if I have one worry is that if this game ends up like the Montana State game was, where it's 24, 30 free throw night for Idaho State, where where they're allowed to muck it up a little bit, which they can do.
Yeah.
Then it's one of those games that we could be in a little bit of trouble with. Because we've got to keep, whether it's Deshaun Thomas on the floor, we got to keep, Oki out of foul trouble. We got to keep Bannon fresh.
Yep.
And if that works out, and then you get the play you would expect from Moody, I think it's a game that they should win.
Yeah.
Because we match up reasonably well with Idaho State. I think it's a game we should win, but it's one of those things where you just never really know which version of Montana you're going to get in the last 5 minutes of a game.
Yeah, hold your breath.
Hold your breath.
Don't hold your breath.
Or don't. Yeah, because you'll probably pass out and end up in the ER or something.
Exactly. So the next game you've got Weber State, Sac State, which that's I don't want to be mean to Sac State. They're a good team, but I just don't buy them right now, being who they are. They're a great team and they've got some good parts. But outside of the guy Chappelle that they have, I really don't see the scoring. There's long points of time where they don't play their big guy McCray. And I think that's their puzzle, where they could be milking that a little bit more than they are. But I know that they probably can't, because it's just, one of those battles that you face. I don't think you're going to be able to play him very much against Weber State, where they've got Dylan Jones, and there's just some mismatches in that game.
Yeah.
I think Weber State takes that game. It might be closer than people think, but I just don't think that you're going to be able to stop Dylan Jones. He's just the mismatch that everybody has.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think this game probably hinges, if I have my sense. But the real thing for me is that if this game is played in the low 50s, it's a game that Sac State can win.
Yeah.
And it very well could be, because both of the teams have played their best basketball when they're playing, 1940s Princeton speed. And so they want to both teams are really good if they can get teams to spend a lot of time on the shot clock. But then that comes down to game scorers, and it's hard to hard to bet against of what Dylan Jones can do, because he scores just in. He never gives you the sense that he has the ability to score from anywhere, and then suddenly he puts 25 points in.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's not like consistent. It's like all in droves too. It's like, oh, you showed up. Okay.
Oh, hey, good to see you. Like, that's the way I feel like that one. That whole side of the bracket, those two games, you know, and then whoever wins that one will play Montana State. I mean, you might as well just bring your football pads, because that's just going to be, again, stylistically, that type of thing where I don't think anybody gets out of the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, well, and I think you've got something here, Josh, because I'm just looking at Weber State's games against Sac State. The two games that they've played, Weber State both won them, but it was a 50-48 win, and a 52-49 win. So,
yeah, I watched both of them.
If your over/under is under 50 or over 50, I would be betting that under 50 mark.
Yeah, if Vegas comes with a line of like 110 points for that, take the under.
Exactly.
Because the game in Ogden was just it was the ugliest looking thing, and mostly because it wasn't even ugly offensively. It was just there was no continuity.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and Sac State had every opportunity in that game in Ogden to take it. And then they just sort of, you know, Weber does what Weber does at home and found a way to sneak it out. But like I said, that game, I'd be surprised if the winner got into the, if they got to 60, whoever gets to 60 first will win it.
Yeah.
You know, I'd be stunned if it's not like a 55-51 final type deal.
Yeah, I think Weber State pulls it out.
Yeah.
You think Weber State pulls that one out too?
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, I think we're pretty much to the same point, except for maybe the PSU UNC game. We've got, you know, Griz in Eastern Washington and the Cats and Weber State. You know, I could be the homer and say the Griz are going to win that game, which I think they possibly could do. Which that game, there's a whole lot of things have to go right?
Yeah.
We have to be able to guard their big guys off of those screens and limit them from 3-point and not give them those easy shots at the free throw line, because that's where they kill you too. Which I think, if I'm remembering right, I think they're second to Montana State, I believe, with free throws. I think Montana State has an atrocious number of free throws this year. And then I think Eastern's right behind them. So if we, you know, limit their three-pointers, get them off the line where we're playing that good pack line defense and not fouling, I think that we have a shot versus that game. If we're getting them and we're not holding them on the 3-point line and they're getting to the line, that's going to be a hard game to win.
Yeah. Again, I think this comes down to how the game's played.
Yep.
If it has any pace to it at all,
I
think it's a game that Eastern wins. But only once in the last, 3-4 weeks of basketball has Montana given up more than like 73 points in a game.
Yep.
So, as long as the game stays in the 60s, Eastern plays okay defense, but they're not excellent defensively.
Yeah.
So as long as the game stays in touch in that, where Montana seems to be in a sweet spot recently, if Montana gets to 65 or 70 points, you know, I feel pretty good about it, because that, you know, the anomaly was that first game of the year where we lost 87-80. Because the other game in Cheney was 67-60, and we were relatively in touch with them the whole game. Both of the games, really. We just sort of, you know, that the game in Missoula was just more of a one where we had our opportunities. We were up with 6 minutes left, and then it was just, you know, like we did early, which we just couldn't find ways to close out. But our rotations are vastly different now than what we used. Because we were done with Eastern before, I think, like
first
the
2 weeks
of February.
First 2 weeks in
it's
January, I believe.
So we're a lot different team. Maybe not defensively, but in terms of what we do now offensively, I think as much as people like to malign what Travis has done,
Yeah.
what they've done offensively, especially in second halves of games this latter half of the year, I, I think it's some of his best coaching.
Yeah.
It's because they can look atrocious, like in that Idaho game. They looked absolutely awful, but they make a couple of subtle adjustments, and suddenly everybody is going downhill to the basket and getting layups. And they're just these real quiet little things they've been doing offensively that I think if this game can stay in the 60s, it's a game that they can win. I'm not going to guarantee it, but it's just more of where I feel like if this thing has any pace at all, I just think Eastern scores way too easily.
Yeah.
They're the best, like, complete 1 through 5 offensive team in the conference.
Yep.
And they just score way too easily. And if they have any amount of fluidity where this game doesn't, bog down the way Travis likes it, it's going to be a game that I don't think we win.
Yeah.
I would be stunned if we won a game against Eastern where we're outside of the 60s. I would be stunned.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I'll be the homer and I'll pick the Griz to win this one. I feel like I think they'll want this one, and so I'll pick the Griz. Who are you picking, Josh? You picking?
Yeah, I think I'm going to be a little bit of a homer, but it has more to what I actually saw. I mean, I watched tail end of I think teams know that if they can slow the pace down a little bit, against Eastern, it's what we did in that game in Cheney.
Yeah.
And, we were in contact with them for most of the game.
We shot horribly in that game.
Shot terribly.
Yeah.
Terribly.
Yeah.
And I think it's just one of those things where I think, again, we've been able to manage the tempo lately.
Yep.
And as long as we're able to manage the tempo and it doesn't turn into that Cat Griz game in Bozeman where they go to the line, because, they made, when we played them in January in Missoula, they shot, and I think they were like 29 or 31 from the free throw line. And so as long as the game doesn't turn into that, where, they're doing shooting 42 free throws, if it's a conference tournament game where that doesn't end up like that, it's sort of officiated semi-normally.
Yeah.
Then it's a game I feel like we can win.
And hopefully they have the refs that will allow this. Like, this is a conference tournament. Just let them play.
You never know.
Really, you hold your breath, right?
Yeah.
So, our last game, guys, or before the championship game, would be the Cats versus Weber State. I just don't see how Montana State loses that game against Weber State. Weber State would have to have probably an amazing game by Dylan Jones. I just don't think they have that in them.
Yeah, I feel like there's two things at play here. Number one is that I think that Montana State, which is weird because I really do think that probably in terms of what they have, is probably the most difficult team to play against in the conference.
Yeah.
And it's because it's mind-boggling how that they're so readily able to take advantage of matchups. And Eastern does it too. It's just that how they can get, and it doesn't have to be Bello, and it doesn't have to be Raekwon Battle. They just seem to find that guy every night that can give them, like it was Osabor in that second game for us. I think their ability to manipulate teams defensively causes teams problems. And so I feel like this is a game that Montana State should win. And I think it's because they score easier. And I think also for the same reason is that they do have a little bit of an answer defensively for Dylan Jones. And as long as Dylan Jones doesn't go, circa, Anthony Johnson from Montana in the early 2010s, where you're scoring 40 points a night, this is probably a matchup that it probably benefits Montana State more than it does. I think Weber was hoping it will get us on the other side of the bracket. They've struggled more against teams who can do what they do.
Yep.
But they're much better when they can play teams where they can be more of the physical aggressor. Yep. And then like I said, we were talking about a couple weeks ago, then they played that weird game against Northern Colorado and got boat raced by 25. Which didn't make any sense. So
no, it didn't make any sense.
But there's very little about this conference season that's made any sense to anyone.
Yeah.
So
we could be all wrong with these picks, and it wouldn't surprise us.
Oh, I guarantee. I have never made a career of doing this.
So our Wednesday championship game. And a side point is you can watch all these games on ESPN Plus, which I love that because if you're like me and I don't have ESPNU or ESPN2, you can still watch them on ESPN Plus. So definitely, if you haven't gotten ESPN Plus, definitely do. We are at that point where we're predicting a Griz Cat championship game, and this is probably where. That's going to be a hard game. That game's going to be tension filled. I would love to see that game because the third time, and this is like what we've been saying, if the refs let them play, I feel like that's a winnable game for us.
Yeah, I think the way that the other two games played out, and like I said, is that if it's a Montana State final. I think it's one of those games where it comes down to really, for Montana, how easily can Bannon score?
Mm-hmm.
Because Bannon didn't score in Bozeman.
No.
He struggled all night because he doesn't match up very well.
Yeah.
With what Montana State likes to do defensively. It's one of those games where you'd have to think that it would have to be Deshaun Thomas, who's been sort of the odd man out in recent weeks because he hasn't been able to stay out of foul trouble, or somebody like Moody.
Yeah.
And Moody, he could put up 30 shots a game and score 40 if that's ultimately necessary, but it's not a good matchup in that regard if Bannon can't score.
Yeah.
And that's what MSU did against us in Bozeman, and because they're really good at mucking up the game. And I give Sprinkle credit for that because they've got so much length down low and they're athletic.
Yep.
And so Bannon's natural matchups that he's really good at, which they've done really, really good job of recently, of getting him lanes to the basket from the perimeter. You just don't get it from playing against MSU,
Well, and it's weird in that game. Like the first half was atrocious for Bannon, right? But then that second half, they changed some things and they get him going a little bit just based off of, I think that the Bello had a little bit of foul trouble as well. And he ends up with 25 points, 8 rebounds. Yeah. But you wouldn't have thought that at halftime that was going to happen.
And that was part of the problem is, he doesn't score much in the first half.
Yeah.
And that's where that whole game was determined essentially. Cause it was like, it was one of the ugliest, we, talked ad nauseum about it. But the fact of the matter is if it's that type of game, it's not a game I think Montana wins because we just don't have the type of size to be able to handle rather consistently what they have in Osibor and Bello down low. We just don't.
Yep.
And that's why I think, if you'd have asked me at the beginning of the year who I thought the best two teams in the conference were, I would have told you Weber State and Montana State. Mm-hmm. That's not obviously how it ended up, but if it's an MSU Eastern final, I think it's a game that MSU wins. If it's MSU or a game, I think, then it's a little bit more of a coin flip because we are more similar stylistically wise to what MSU does. And we've shown that we're probably, one possession or maybe two possessions of going 2-0 against them.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those deals. So I feel like, again, it's my opinion, but I feel like, if that's a game that happens where U of M finds a way to get through that upper part of the bracket,
Yep.
we might actually be fresher than Montana State.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I think
they would have to go through Portland State or UNC and then Weber State probably.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that game, because it, like I said, I don't feel like that bottom part of the bracket is necessarily the most conducive to fresh and easy legs. Those are all going to be heavy games. And whereas, whoever comes out of that upper part of the bracket, even if it's not Montana, I would say probably odds on is probably Eastern, but whoever comes out of that top part of the bracket is going to be, just because of how stylistically different they are. It's going to be Eastern or Montana or even NAU. It's entirely a possibility. They're going to have a lot fresher legs and bodies by the time they get to that championship game, just because, again, MSU's got to play, a knockdown dragout game. And if it's Weber, that would be 3 consecutive games playing against, playing a football style game, super physical, slow paced, heavy on defense, heavy on offense, that type of deal.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if that happens, I'll pick the Griz, just because I think 3 times in a row it's hard to beat a team. So, we're homers. We can be homers if we want.
Yeah, right.
So let's go over the women's side. They have a kind of a weird game against Idaho, where they scooch by Idaho. I believe it was 85-82, which that was good, because they're going into that game with 2 straight losses. An overtime loss to Portland State, and then a loss to Sac State, 56-63. But we scooched by 85-82, which I think kind of stops the bleeding and kind of is good to send some of these seniors out on a win.
Yeah.
And so they do get, G Feller. Carmen G Feller has announced that she's coming back for another year, which is good, because that team's going to be a little young next year, even younger than probably this year, because they're bringing in some really good talent. But that'll be good for next year. Beside the point, though, they beat Idaho. They get into the Big Sky Conference tournament. And it's like a mirror image, right? They got the 5 seed. They're in the 4-5 game against Eastern Washington. And so let's just kind of go through some of these games. Probably won't break it down as much, just because, we can, but I don't know as much women's basketball on all the other teams than I do the men. I do know that the top teams in the women's side. But you got UNC and Weber State. I know UNC is very, very young, and Weber State has just not had a very good season this year. And probably, I would probably say their coach is probably on the hot seat if not. So
I feel like that's a game, because I've watched only, as much as probably most have. I mean, I've watched a handful of MSU games, maybe a couple of the NAU games, but outside of that. But I think that what NAU, or not NAU, but UNC did show is that some of that young core that they have, they're not going to be bad.
No, they're going to be good.
But they're not particularly they're not particularly deep, and they're not as good defensively.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think they probably are a better. I think they're probably of that first line games, probably more likely than not to win. I just feel like their youth might actually be in a benefit here, a little bit, considering how young they are. But the one thing Weber State is, they're just uber physical. So, but they just don't score very well. So it's like, I feel like in this type of environment where it's on a neutral floor, I go with the team that probably scores a little bit better. So,
I agree with you. I think UNC goes on and moves on to play NAU, which this is such a weird thing, because it's 3 co-champions, right? So
right.
NAU, Montana State, and Sac State all got a share of the title because Montana State slipped up and got a 3-way share of the title. Portland State versus Idaho State. Just crazy how far Idaho State has fallen from the last couple of years, where they were, I believe, back-to-back Big Sky championship games. Portland State has kind of been up and down with, where they have been. I think this is their second year of their new coach as well. I think this one is more of a coin flip to me. I could see Portland State winning, but I think Idaho State has that kind of more solid coach. So I kind of tend to lean towards Idaho State winning this game just because of the experience of the coach.
Yeah, I think Sobolewski's as good as there is in the conference. But what I would take is that if there's somebody who can go out and score 35, then that's the Morales girl from Portland State.
Yeah,
and I think that if that becomes that type of thing, she can score against anybody.
Yeah.
And so, I feel like that this is one of those games, at least matchup wise, my gut instinct after what I've seen, Portland State play recently, they're not an easy matchup for teams because they're super athletic on the outside. They cause matchup problems. And that's been, if I'm going to go there, they can get access to the bucket a little bit easier. I might take Portland State here.
Okay. So then you get NAU playing Northern Colorado. I really like this NAU team. This is a really good NAU team that I think is just that. I think it's Lori Payne. I know it's Payne. She's really got this team really cooking really well. I think that if she stays there, this is going to be a good team for a while. And so I see NAU easily winning against UNC.
Yeah. And again, because the NAU is just a tough matchup for most of the teams in the conference. Yep. They are so long and they play and they play really good defense, which helps, but they are so long and teams have just struggled. And they had a couple of that, sort of like Montana State did. They had a couple of those games where you're like, well, how do they lose them? and so you're like, that is, if I were to take, if my gut instinct, I feel like it's NAU wins that game. And then, as long as MSU doesn't, pull out the gun and shoot themselves in the foot like they did at the end of the year, they should win that game, regardless of whoever they face. Because, if it comes down to, guard play in the conference, you really probably shouldn't bet against Darian White. So
I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I totally agree with that. I think Montana State moves on. So we got NAU moving on in Montana State. We're going to talk about the Griz game against Eastern Washington. If you look at their past 2 games, it's two drastic games, right? So Eastern Washington at Missoula, the Griz got boat raced 87-60, right? And then, at Cheney, we beat them by 11. But, if you look at the Eastern Washington, their main score went off 33 points by Jada Martin. And so that's they've got a lot, I'm not going to say that, Eastern Washington's a great team, but they do have certain pieces where they can score. And so I think that what's been kind of missing with this team is that consistent defensive play with the Griz. And if they're not careful, if they're not playing their defense that they need to play, that game could get away from them.
Yeah. And that's been like I had made the comment to a friend of mine about how that Portland State game played out. And it's a game they should have won. And
Yeah.
for the same reason, them, playing the way they did the last those last 3 games,
Yeah.
they put themselves in this position a little bit in the sense that they're missing, that one sort of key cog defensively.
Yep.
And they don't defend as well on the perimeter, and it just, they miss Styles a lot.
Yeah.
In that regard. They just, they're going to, those freshmen are going to get there,
Mm-hmm.
but when they don't, you're asking Markson, who's probably better as a off ball defender, to do a lot of the on ball defending. And it just, when it push comes to shove late in games, you wish you'd have that ability to slow people down offensively on the perimeter. And it's just been sort of consistent problem they've had
Yeah.
for a lot of the conference season, is that if the other team's got a guard that can play vertically down the floor, they just, that seems to be sort of a little bit of the Achilles heel.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though, I love the comment. Thanks, Ron. But I think, the Griz, I think they move on and play NAU. I think that they're probably more suited playing NAU than they are probably Eastern Washington. I think they match up a little bit better.
I agree.
And so, they've had over a week to prepare for this game. I think that they'll do a better job. I don't see that Jada Martin going off for 30 again.
No. And I think, again, this is, once the Lady Grizz turned February,
Yeah.
you started to see a little bit different rotation.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully they have some of their bench back for this week. Since they were relatively thin, for that Portland State game. Heward was out. And so it's like, if they can get some of that back, then I think they're in good shape. But you look at our margins again all year long for the women have been pretty dang small.
Yeah.
They've got you need the freshmen to have, you need, Koenig, who's, freshman of the year.
Yep.
If she plays at where she had been for most of the second half of the season, it's a game they should win.
Oh yeah.
But again, she didn't play particularly well against Portland State.
Yep.
And then against
0 points.
Yeah.
30 minutes. Yeah.
And then against Idaho, it became the returner show. It was G. Feller and who is it?
Fatkin.
I think.
Yeah, 21 points. Feller.
Yeah, so
18.
Like, if they have to lean on the sort of the big issue lately is, whether they can get, Fatkin goes from, scoring 25 to down to 3. So they've had that same sort of vacillation between high and low. If they can find some sort of happy medium in the middle where they can get consistent performances out of Koenig and then Fatkin especially, I think they'll be all right. But again, it's been flip a coin really lately about, how they finish out games and, who's going to do the scoring.
That Portland State road trip was horrible too, as they had to take bus it, and the Portland State men's team didn't show up here, but we drive and we make it here.
That was weird.
So I thought that was kind of weird, but I think we make it. Going into Sac State, Idaho, that Sac State team is really good.
They play so fast.
They're really good.
So fast. I think that's a game that I think it should be a game that Sac State wins.
Yeah.
But at the same point, if B has the game, which he had been a little bit off, Idaho probably shouldn't have been 6th.
Yeah.
But at the same point, the difference between 4th and 7th in our conference wasn't a whole lot.
No, it wasn't.
And for women. And so I think when you look at it, it was 1A, 1B, 1C, and then everybody else in the middle was, a game or two on either side of each other. So you're looking at a game where if Sac State plays the way that they're capable of playing, this is a game stylistically they should win, just by high, they score as easy as any team in the conference.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to see that game, that the Montana State Sac State game. Just out of that might be one of the funnest games we'd see on the women's side the whole tournament if it ends up like that. That game could be 95-87.
Yeah.
Just because of how fast they play. Because and Montana State can match them.
Oh yeah.
Which is sort of weird is that you don't think it, and then suddenly the Montana State women go out and put 85 on you.
Oh yeah.
But that game would be a fun game to watch if that's.
And I think that's going to happen. I think you're going to get Montana State versus Sac State on that lower bracket. I just don't see Idaho putting up enough where they can stop what Sac State has.
Yeah.
Beyonce is a phenomenal talent, but she can't win it herself, right?
No,
she could try. She almost did. She almost hit him with Montana,
yeah.
But I don't think she's gonna be able to do that with Sac State. I see that Montana State going with Sac State. I see Griz versus NAU, and those if that's true, those are two really good semifinal games on the women's side that I hope people watch on Tuesday.
Right, and of the two games, stylistic and probably more pleasing to watch, it would be that Montana Sac game if it ends up like that. Because the NAU UM game, if it ends up like that, is likely to be a lot more of a I wouldn't call it a slugfest, but it's just one of those games about how NAU plays.
Yeah.
It's not likely going to be as fast paced, and free form and flowing.
Yeah.
That's a game that because of NAU's length, they want to be able to take advantage of it. And so they're so good at getting balls off of the perimeter, even onto the wing and then working through and down into the post. And because they can move anybody and play them anywhere. I think that it feels like when I've watched them play a little bit, it feels like that they can play any of their 3, 4, or 5 girls in any sort of interchangeable position.
Yeah.
And so they're just a hard defensive matchup. I don't think they score nearly as well as they did last year. And that seems to be a little bit of their Achilles heel, is that they have a little bit of a penchant to have bad shooting nights. But at the same point, I would take just their length and their athleticism and their ability to play defense over, just about any other team in the conference, maybe than MSU. So,
yeah, I just think it's going to be hard to pick that game just because, the games that NAU and Montana have played, they're one possession game, right? One of them was an 80-76 overtime win by Montana in Flagstaff, which is an amazing win. And then, Northern Arizona returned the favor for the first time, 74-76 up here in Missoula, which that game was a weird game in the fact that the Griz probably should have won that game, where we didn't show up for a quarter. And that's been kind of like the thing that's happened this year is that third quarter just bites the Lady Griz. I think that one to me is kind of a coin flip. It kind of just depends on who's hot that game and how they're calling it as well. Because I think we lost. Didn't we lose Lisa Kiefer with a leg injury? And so we're down another big. So I don't know. I think that the Griz could win it, but that's going to be a really tough game.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I felt like at the beginning of the year, I felt like NAU had the best team in the conference, and I sort of feel like they are, because I think they're the deepest.
Yeah.
And they can score in a lot of different ways. They may not have a true, volume scorer like MSU has and Darian White, but I think when a push comes to shove, I think they can score because they can put teams in positions where everybody has to defend.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then that's a clear advantage of that NAU has over just about any team in the conference, because we're not as good in the post as we have been, and if they can get access to the block like they've been in a handful of games, like especially the game here, or in Missoula rather, since neither of us are actually here. You're in Wyoming and I'm in California. So, but the point being is that I mean, my gut instincts, I would love to see UM win that game. I just want U of M to win a game in the tournament.
Yep.
So, I mean, that sounds weird, but we are like 1 for our last 87 in the tournament for the women's side. So,
yeah, I think that's the next step that Coach Hollinger has to do is win a game and kind of grow from that. I think they will this year with that Eastern Washington game. If they can get 2, that's great. I think that just based off of what we've seen, I think it's going to be hard for that semifinal game. Yeah. Could I see it? Yeah. I'm not expecting that, though.
No, I think it's going to be close, because I think I think that's just how the game will play out.
Yeah.
What it really comes down to is that, because I think in tournament games like this, you got to go with who scores easiest, and and we, as much as good as Koenig has been, she's gotten taken out of games a little bit lately, and I just feel like that's sort of if the U of M is going to make a deep run in this, it's going to have to be on the back of how well Koenig does.
Yeah,
and if she does well, and they're able to use, either in Fatkin in a reserve role, or coming, or not Fatkin, but Burton Oliver. Burton Oliver in a reserve role, and continue to use that 7 or 8, person bench.
Yeah.
And leaning on Stump as well. But, this is going to come down to whether those freshmen play well. I think we'll get enough performance out of G Feller. But for us to do well, it's going to have to be on the back of whether Koenig can sort of find a way to efficiently score. Because otherwise they'll go through like they did in that MSU game and like that Portland State game, where it's like, whether it's the second or the third quarter, sometimes it's just it's really hard for them to find a way to score.
Yeah, well, and that was a weird game too.
Really weird.
Yeah, so they were up like 15-14, and then all of a sudden I checked back. I was dealing with my kiddos, and I was like, "Whoa, wait, what happened here?" Like, holy cow, just drastic.
So. Yeah, and again, I think it just really comes down to the fact that we're not. Again, that's that point guard play. At the end of that Portland State game, you really felt like, well, what we really missed is somebody who could facilitate the offense.
Yeah.
And, we don't sometimes really struggle at getting into the offense. And, that's what happened in that we had so many opportunities against that Portland State game to win it. And it just was, we turn over the ball a lot. And, that's that, give Koenig an extra year, Stump an extra year, and suddenly we're handling the ball a lot better, and we don't turn it over nearly as much in those tight spots. But so when you lose close games or have trouble scoring, it's making things a little bit easier, and sometimes we make it really difficult. So
yeah, and the next semifinal game, you look at probably one of the hottest teams, probably in Sac State, coming in. And then Montana State kind of reeling from losing on their senior day. That's going to be a really, really nice game to watch. I just think that if they somehow Sac State somehow kind of limit Darian White, which is hard to do, I think they'll be in good shape.
Yeah.
It'll be what type of game is this going to be, right? Is this going to be a fast-paced game that we probably expect it to be with Sac State? Or does Montana do the opposite, which they can, and play this slower ball and slow it up on them, which I could see them doing that as well.
Yeah, I feel like that if that's the feeling I get is that if Montana State can not necessarily slow the tempo, but play their game, which is allowing Bad Bear, allowing some of their other post players to get touches rather consistently, to where Darian doesn't have to score 52 points or whatever.
Yeah.
I think she could do that anyway if she wanted, but but I think really this is a game where if Bad Bear is allowed to get consistent touches and in positions where she can score, this is a game I think Montana State wins. And again, I think people sort of underestimated the lack of depth that MSU had coming out of last year. They're like, well, they're losing, like half of their squad, but I think that really what it's shown is that they're really good at getting some of those freshmen and sophomores they have positions to succeed.
Yeah.
And
they do that
really,
so
really,
well.
yeah.
Well, Binford plays, a 9 to 10 rotation. And that's for a reason.
And it's matchup specific.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those ones where if you can find a way, and I just feel like that depth that MSU plays with, and especially considering with how fast and Sac State can play, it's probably going to benefit them more than not. I just feel like when it comes down to if this game's close, it's Darian White's game.
Yeah.
And it's hard to not just put all your eggs in the Darian White basket and say this is her tournament to lose.
Yeah,
but it's really not. But I'm just saying that there's not a more transformative player in the conference women's wise. She's just so good, and she can get any shot she wants from anywhere, and she can manipulate the game defensively. And so, if you're going to take a stylistic game, which I've only used that word a million times tonight, I would lean on the fact that Montana State's got a very noticeable post presence, and they can play a pace of a game. And I think they have the ability, because they have Darian White, to play at a pace that she'll still be allowed to get her points, and it's not conditional on whether this game gets into the 80s or not. But they're the one team in the conference that I think matches up pretty dang well with Sac State. Because of how Sac State plays. So I think I'd take Montana State in that game, to be honest.
I did too. I think coming down, I think we have NAU versus Montana State. Kind of like a coin flip where you could probably see maybe the Griz if they play well, where it would be Montana State, Montana. But I think that NAU probably just wins that game.
Yeah, I do too. And I feel like, if you're to rank the most likely matchup, I feel like it's going to be that the one advantage, MSU gets that night off, and having to wait until and getting that, so that Sac State has to play 2 nights in a row. And so and I feel like that, in terms of ranking, I think it's probably most likely going to be NAU on the top side of the bracket, probably U of M second, and then on the other side of it, I think it is a little bit of a coin flip. But like I said, after watching what Binford's done with that group of girls this year, is that I'm not likely to bet against her. So I'd probably take Montana State out of that bottom half. So
And I like honestly, if you're going in that championship game, I don't see how you go against Darian White.
Right.
Winning in March is so hard, but the way that teams do it is they have a point guard. Darian White. Hard for me to say, is the best point guard in the conference right now.
Yeah.
I think you look at Sac State and they have a tremendous point guard, but I don't think she's more. White is more of the floor general, and I think with Sac State's point guard, she kind of more is the facilitator and goes in the offense. She's not really the floor general in scoring and everything like that. If that makes totally any sense there,
I
but
gotcha.
Kalasia D in there, her name was
thank you.
slipping me, but I think that just kind of this is the difference. She is the difference. I think that they move on and they win that conference.
And for me, I'm going to stick with my gut here, which is that I feel like with what NAU does basketball wise, they absolutely just boat raced MSU twice.
Yeah.
One by 29, and then the other one was they lost by 5, but it was a game that that I think NAU had relatively good control. I just think that NAU does so many things offensively that you can't just boil it down to one player. And so I feel like, especially in, let me look at it real quick. I feel like if NAU gets anywhere into the mid 70s, this is a game that they win by a pretty good spell. Okay. And I think again, it's just, I feel like they're just deeper.
Yeah.
They get, whether it's Rodabaugh or Shank will get their points, but they had, it's 6, 6, 6, 6, 9, 5, that whether it's, a Troggy, or who I think might actually be done for the year. But it's one of those things where I feel like that, I think NAU just in terms of regards to how complete they are, I feel like they're the team that that if it gets into those two, I feel like NAU is just probably better positioned to win it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that was the recap, guys, of the men's and women's tournament. Like we said, you've got some good basketball happening here starting Saturday. And so if you don't have ESPN Plus, definitely check it out. You'll get some good games. I've got to ask Josh, have you seen the WCC conference and how they're doing? It reminds me of a flying V on a duck. Like holy cow! How in the world? Like it looks. I don't know how the teams would be like, oh yeah, let's play that. Like seriously, like I don't know.
And I like the idea.
Okay.
I like it because I think the overwhelming concern when you talk about small conferences is who's going to come out of it.
Yeah, definitely.
And so what you do is you create a setup, which is actually what the Big Sky Conference tried to do with this.
Yeah.
Letting the number 1 and 2 seeds have the night off before the semis.
Yeah.
Because I think it sets up a position where, generally speaking, the death knell for the Big Sky Conference is you don't want to be in that play-in game for the 16.
Yep.
And if you're going to set up a position, it was why 20 some odd years ago they went to a 4-team host format, because every year it was the team who won the conference tournament from the last year.
Yep.
And it was just this it never generated teams who are capable of going into the NCAA tournament and being competitive. And they were just like, most of the time we were 16 line. So I like the idea just because, Gonzaga be one and done. or maybe it was a maybe 2. But the idea is you don't want to set it up to create an environment where anybody other than maybe your top 2 or 3 teams can win it. So in the WCC, it's
2.
Typically it's typically 2. It's like St. Mary's and Gonzaga. But I think I'm all for that, especially if you're in this environment where you're the WCC where you get 2 bids, maybe. But for Montana, it's for Big Sky, it's always just going to be the one. And you want to create an environment where your best teams have a chance to go show out in the NC tournament. And it's been, 2008 or 2009 when we beat Nevada. And that's been twice in my lifetime that the Big Sky Conference has won a NCAA tournament game.
Well, Eastern Washington got 1 win, didn't they?
They might have.
They might. I think they got 1 win.
Because but Montana can claim 1. Weber State can claim 2, actually. I think,
2,
but
2 or 3.
but they're all the same, which is they're all coming out of a 13, 14, 15 seed type deal. I mean, it was real rare. I mean, Montana got that 12-5 game that year. And that's literally, I think, the highest ranked or highest seeded Big Sky Conference team. Most of the time we are 14 15 seed. And I think if Eastern were to win it, I would probably have the best shot at getting anything else other than probably a 14, 15 seed. Montana State probably would get a 15, but anybody else is 16. And you're doing the play-in. Montana's in as a play-in. It's that 16 versus 16 game. So it's just what you look at is that what are you doing to create the best opportunity for your conference? And I think the way the Big Sky Conference reset this up now that Southern Utah's gone is probably the best format to ensure that your 2 best teams are playing in the conference championship game. And, we're still going to go get, beat by 20 by somebody, but because that's just generally what happens. I mean, it's been a hot minute since we played, a 1 or a 2 possession game under 10 minutes left to go.
And I still like back in the day when the Griz or whoever hosted it. I just love.
It's a great environment. I mean, I would take it. It's just that I get what the Big Sky Conference is trying to do, because I feel like for Montana State, for Weber State, they're the only ones who draw at home. And so, like, when even as far back as when the men hosted in the early 90s, that was a sellout environment. But the other year where we didn't win, we lost to NAU in a semi game, and there was like 7 people in the stands for the championship game.
Wow.
So the point, I get what the Big Sky Conference is trying to do, because you can't go into some of those gyms and host a conference championship.
Oh no.
I mean, really, you can't do it in Portland.
Nope.
You
Sac
can,
State.
but you can't do it at Sac State. UNC is they've done it before, but it's not the most conducive. It's not a very good TV setup. And so you play half of your conference tournament games, or your potential for where they would host, and they're not very good places to host, especially if you're trying to show out for the conference. So, I would much prefer them to be in Vegas, but Boise's better than Reno was. But I would say Vegas or Spokane Arena, but
I'm surprised they don't do like Salt Lake or Denver, but
it comes down to whether arenas want to bid for it. And the Big Sky Conference is a 27th out of like 32 team Division I power ranking. It's not exactly going to create like because the WCC up until they went to what I think they're like at the Rio or something like that in Vegas, it was the way the Big Sky Conference used to be. It used to be, 1 year it was played at Santa Clara, the next year it was played at USD, that type of deal.
Yep.
And I think the neutral site thing for what the Big Sky Conference want is probably the best of the world if you want to ensure that we don't have a game played at a rec center in, Sacramento like they almost had to that year, because they wouldn't have been able to host it on campus.
No.
And so they were like, well, we have a facility we can rent out. And I'm like, that I'm not sure that that's really satisfies what the conference is trying to do.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know how they increase the standing until we start winning non-conference games. So, we're still like 27, 28th ranked, and we have one team we might have two teams who have 20 conference win or 20 overall wins, but it's going to be another hard year of watching us go play
major Power 5.
A Power 5 conference school in an environment that's not. I think of all the teams that we have, that's the best suited to go win a game is Eastern.
Oh yeah, definitely
by a long shot, because they score easily. They're a hard matchup.
Yeah,
and so unless they
larger, so
and so I feel like if there's a team that goes out and wins the tournament, that probably is the best for the conference, it would be Eastern.
Yeah, definitely.
Because everybody else, it's just a matter of getting the right matchup. Whereas I don't know that it matters as much with Eastern.
Yeah.
Because I think they can play stylistic with just about anybody. So
true. Well, guys, we're gonna cut it there. Thank you for listening. We can't thank you enough for listening. Josh, thanks for joining me on here, man. I appreciate it a lot.
Not a problem.
Make sure you guys go rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can find our podcast wherever you can get podcasts, and also, get out and show us what you think of your predictions of the Big Sky. Take a picture of it, fill it out, and put us in the hashtag and link us to it. So we want to see what you guys think. Get us on Twitter at Fight on Montana. We would love to see your bracket, but also just love to see you keep on listening to us. Get a hold of us if you guys want to get in contact us and tell us how horrible we're doing or how awesome we're doing as well. So
I like hate mail.
Exactly, right? So we will see you guys again next time. And as always, go Griz.
Go Griz.